Okay, let me tell you about this whole mess with my house. It's Mike Reynolds, by the way. Man, I spent what felt like forever searching for the right place, somewhere I could finally ditch the city noise and just hear the ocean. You know, that peaceful vibe. When I stumbled upon this place, this sweet two-story beachfront house with a porch that wrapped all the way around and these huge windows looking right out at the water, I thought, this is it. Jackpot. The absolute best part? It was legally separate from the neighborhood HOA. The guy I bought it from, Richard Callahan, an old fella who'd lived there for like 30 years, swore up and down the house was never part of the association, never would be. Apparently, way back when they first built up the community, the original owner of my plot flat out refused to sign the HOA agreement. He made sure his property stayed independent. Richard told me the HOA had tried multiple times over the years to pull the house into their fold, but they always failed. To me, this was a massive plus, all the perks of a nice neighborhood without the nitpicky rules and fees. I was stoked. Closed the deal, moved in, started dreaming up renovation plans. But right from day one, I felt this weird vibe. The neighbors weren't exactly rolling out the welcome mat. While I was hauling boxes, I caught people peeking from behind curtains, whispering on their porches. I waved at a couple across the street. They just glanced at each other, turned around, and went inside. Real friendly. The most obvious hostility came from this woman. Always wearing this massive sun hat and giant sunglasses, you couldn't really see her face, just standing at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, staring like I'd personally kicked her dog. I tried to shrug it off. Maybe they weren't used to new people. Maybe they were just stuck-up beach snobs. Whatever. It was my house now, and I wasn't going anywhere. It took exactly 2 days for the trouble to start. I found a crisp white envelope tucked into my front door, fancy gold logo, and everything. I thought, okay, maybe a welcome letter? Nope. It was a formal violation notice from the Coastal Ridge Homeowners Association. Said my house wasn't up to community aesthetic standards. According to them, the paint color wasn't on their approved list of boring neutrals and needed changing within 30 days. Plus, my landscaping was apparently overgrown and neglected, and I needed to submit some kind of modification request to fix it. If I didn't comply, fines, naturally. I actually laughed out loud. I hadn't even finished unpacking, let alone thought about painting. And the landscaping? Looked fine to me. A little wild, maybe, but it had character, unlike the golf course perfect, sterile lawns everyone else had. But the funniest part? The HOA had zero, absolutely zero, authority over my place. My house wasn't part of their club. Their rules didn't apply. I tossed the letter, figuring it was just an automated mistake, some glitch in their system. But then came another one, and another. Each one was more aggressive. One claimed my mailbox wasn't compliant, even though it looked exactly like half the others on the street. Another accused me of unauthorized modifications. I hadn't touched a thing. The last one threatened escalating fines and legal action. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. They were targeting me. A few days later, I finally met the woman in the sun hat, Barbara Jenkins, president of the Coastal Ridge HOA. The moment she opened her mouth, I knew what I was dealing with. She had that sickeningly sweet, practiced politeness that just dripped condescension. You could practically feel the disdain radiating off her. She made it crystal clear she wasn't happy about me being there. When I pointed out, very politely, that my house was legally separate from the HOA and her rules didn't apply to me, her expression barely changed, but I saw a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "We'll see about that," she muttered before turning and stalking off. And that's when things really started getting ugly. First, the road crew somehow forgot to plow or patch the little stretch of street leading to my house. I called multiple times, got the runaround. Then, my trash stopped getting picked up. Everyone else's bins were emptied like clockwork. Mine just sat there, full. The biggest slap in the face came a week later. Woke up one morning, turned on the faucet. Nothing. Water was shut off. I called the utility company, furious. They claimed there was a billing issue. Bull. I had set up automatic payments for everything before I even moved in. I spent hours on the phone, getting transferred, put on hold, until finally, some poor customer service rep, probably risking their job, admitted off the record that the community board had put pressure on them to review my account. Translation: Barbara and her cronies had pulled strings to shut off my water. That was it. The final straw. I could ignore the snotty letters and the cold shoulders. But messing with my basic utilities? Oh, hell no. I wasn't just going to roll over. I started digging. researching the HOA's history, looking for any dirt I could find. And boy, did I find it. This HOA had a long, nasty history, shady dealings, bogus fines, even seizing properties and suing homeowners who dared question them. More importantly, I found proof they'd been trying for years to annex my property, but kept hitting legal roadblocks. They weren't just harassing me because they didn't like me, they wanted my house. Okay, game on. I installed security cameras everywhere. Started a detailed log. Every interaction, every letter, every service disruption. Then, I hired a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but Daniel Evans, a guy who specialized in kicking HOA butt. When I showed Daniel the deeds and documents proving my house was exempt, his eyes lit up. They have absolutely no case, he said. But we can make this very, very expensive for them. I wasn't just going to defend myself anymore. I was going on the attack. If they wanted a war, they were about to get one. I knew these HOA folks were relentless, but I honestly didn't expect them to go nuclear so fast. After realizing I wasn't going to be easily bullied, with the notices ignored, the service disruptions documented, and a lawyer involved, they didn't just back off. Oh no. Instead of trying more petty harassment, they went straight for a full-blown lawsuit against me. I found out bright and early one morning when a process server knocked on my door. Handed me this official-looking envelope, HOA logo right there at the top. I ripped it open right on the porch, flipping through the pages. Legal jargon everywhere. My anger just grew with every line. Coastal Ridge HOA was suing me. Get this, for violating community standards, reducing property values, and, my personal favorite, obstructing the ocean view for other homeowners. It was pure, unadulterated insanity. Violating community standards? My house wasn't in their community. Reducing property values? My place had been there for decades, long before most of their McMansions. The only thing that changed was me, an owner who wouldn't kiss their rings. But the obstructing views claim? That took the cake. My house sat where it always sat. It didn't magically grow taller overnight. I called Daniel Evans, my lawyer, immediately. He came over later that day and went through the lawsuit paperwork. They're desperate, Mike, he said, flipping through the pages. No legal grounds whatsoever. They're hoping you'll either give up or settle just to make it go away. I crossed my arms, staring at the ridiculous claims. Not happening. Daniel grinned. Good. Because this is actually going to be fun. That's the thing about these HOA fights, Daniel explained. They're messy, they drag on, but when the law is clearly on your side, it can be satisfying to watch the bully squirm. He'd spent years taking down corrupt HOAs, and he could already see the holes in their case. They're trying to argue your house is an eyesore, he explained. Subjective nonsense. Won't hold up. They're claiming your renovations are causing disruptions. You haven't even started renovations. But this ocean view claim, that's their Hail Mary. I let out a sharp breath. Yeah, explain that one again. Okay, so your house is on slightly higher ground, right? They're going to argue it blocks the panoramic view some neighbors used to have. They'll claim this lowers their property values, and you should pay for their supposed loss. I just stared at him. That's insane. My house has been here forever. Daniel chuckled grimly. Of course, it's ridiculous. But they're gambling that a judge won't want to deal with the complexity and might just rule against you to make the problem disappear. So, what's our move? I asked. Daniel leaned back, that smirk returning. We hit them where it hurts. First step, file a motion to dismiss. Force the HOA to actually provide a legal reason for their claims before we even get to trial. Daniel also drafted a killer countersuit: harassment, defamation, illegal interference with property rights. If the HOA thought they could bully me without consequence, they were sorely mistaken. I wasn't just playing defense anymore. I spent the next week gathering every shred of evidence I had. The service disruptions, the hostile encounters, the threatening letters. I even upgraded my security cameras. Top of the line, high def, covered every angle. If anyone from the HOA stepped foot on my property or tried any funny business, I'd have crystal clear proof. And wouldn't you know it, that investment paid off fast. 3 days later, my cameras caught Barbara Jenkins herself, standing right at the edge of my lawn with another board member. The footage showed them pointing at my house, measuring something with a tape measure, shaking their heads, and snapping photos. Daniel actually laughed out loud when I showed him the footage. They're trying to fabricate evidence. They want to argue you made some unauthorized modification to justify their lawsuit. Idiots. Can they? I asked. Nope. Not unless you actually did something, which you haven't. But they don't seem to care about facts. That night, Another letter arrived. Now my fence was supposedly encroaching on community property. Totally false. I had the original survey proving my property lines. Just another attempt to wear me down. But I wasn't just reacting anymore. I started digging into the HOA itself, talking to other homeowners who did run-ins with the board. At first, people were scared to talk. Retaliation from the HOA was a real fear. But when they saw I was actually fighting back and suing them, a few brave souls started opening up. I learned Barbara Jenkins had been HOA president for over 15 years. Under her reign, dozens of homeowners had been fined into oblivion or forced to sell over trumped-up violations. Some had sued, but the HOA had deep pockets and slick lawyers. Most cases either settled quietly or dragged on until the homeowner gave up. But I was different. I had the legal high ground. My property wasn't even in the HOA. And unlike the others, I wasn't afraid to see this through to the bitter end. The final, glorious nail in their coffin came courtesy of my security cameras. Middle of the night, crystal clear footage, one of the HOA board members sneaking onto my property, trying to physically move my fence marker to make it look like I had encroached on their land. He even had a clipboard and measuring tape. I sent the footage straight to Daniel. His response? A single text message. Got him. This wasn't just a civil case anymore. This was evidence of potential criminal activity, trespassing, attempting to tamper with property lines, possibly conspiracy. Daniel smiled when we talked later. This, he said, is the beginning of the end for them. And I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, we were going to win. I knew the HOA was feeling the heat, but I never expected things to unravel so quickly. The lawsuit, my countersuit, Daniel's aggressive legal maneuvers, it was all putting immense pressure on them. But instead of backing down gracefully, they just got sloppier, more desperate. Their war of harassment escalated, but it shifted. It wasn't just about notices anymore. It became more personal, more underhanded. First came the mysterious complaint to the city's zoning department. An official notice on my door, anonymous report, claiming unauthorized modifications. It was almost funny, considering I hadn't hammered a single nail for renovations yet. Just another attempt to use bureaucracy against me. I called Daniel. Classic HOA move, he said. Trying to drown you in red tape. If they can't fine you, they'll get the city to do it. I wasn't playing that game. I scheduled a meeting with the zoning inspector immediately. When he arrived, clipboard in hand, he looked bored, like he already knew this was a waste of his time. He walked the property, checked everything, and just shook his head. I don't know why this was reported, he muttered. Everything looks fine. The complaint was dismissed. Chalk up another failure for the HOA. 2 days later, I woke up to find my driveway completely blocked. A huge pile of gravel and construction cones right at the entrance. Couldn't get my car out. I checked the security cameras. Sure enough, middle of the night, a truck from a local construction company dumped the load. And the driver? Wearing a Coastal Ridge HOA vest. Clear as day. I didn't even bother calling the HOA. I called the police. Showed them the footage, license plate, and all. They tracked the truck back to a contractor who, surprise, surprise, did regular work for the HOA. The cops promised to investigate, but I could tell they didn't want to get tangled in what they saw as a neighborly dispute. Probably just a misunderstanding, one officer said. Right. I ended up paying a private company to clear the gravel myself, but you bet I saved that footage. More fuel for the fire. That night, Daniel called, sounding excited. Got something interesting for you, Mike. Dug into the HOA's past legal battles. Guess what? This isn't their first rodeo. He explained they'd been sued multiple times over the past decade. Several cases settled quietly. One involved a homeowner wrongfully evicted over fake fines. Another involved an elderly couple forced to sell after being buried in bogus violation fees. The pattern is clear, Daniel said. They target people they think won't fight back, pressure them out, then use the empty property to drive up surrounding values. They definitely had a plan for your house. Well, I'm not going anywhere, I said, my jaw tight. Exactly what I hoped you'd say, Daniel chuckled. The harassment kept coming. Bogus noise complaints filed against me. I barely listened to music outside. Then my mail suddenly stopped. The post office confirmed someone had submitted a change of address request for my address. Unbelievable. I had to go through a whole verification hassle to fix it. More wasted time, more frustration, courtesy of the HOA. But the absolute worst? Came home one evening, flipped the light switch, nothing. Power was out. Checked the utility company's site, no outages reported. Called customer support, got the runaround. And finally, someone let it slip. A fraudulent disconnection request had been submitted using my personal details. I was beyond livid. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was a crime. Tampering with utilities? Identity fraud. They had crossed a major line. I called Daniel immediately. "Good," he said. "Good? What are you talking about?" I asked, confused. "Before, we had harassment, property interference. Now, we have proof they committed identity fraud and tampered with essential services. That's criminal, Mike, not just civil. This could mean actual charges against the board members." Daniel didn't waste a second. He filed new motions in court, expanding our countersuit to include fraud, identity theft, and illegal disruption of utilities. He also reported the HOA to the state attorney general for a formal investigation. Then, we went public. I contacted a local journalist known for exposing HOA abuses and gave them everything. The security footage of the gravel dumping, proof of the mail fraud, the details of the illegal power shutoff. Within 24 hours, the story exploded. Headline: Local HOA faces fraud allegations after allegedly tampering with homeowners' utilities. The article went viral. Suddenly, homeowners who'd been too scared before started coming forward. More stories surfaced: harassment, fake violations, illegal property seizures. The HOA, especially Barbara Jenkins, was painted as a corrupt organization abusing its power. Barbara refused to comment. The HOA lawyer issued a weak statement about maintaining community standards. But the damage was done. The public tide had turned. I could feel it. The HOA was finally, truly, on the defensive. And I wasn't stopping until they paid for everything. The pressure on the HOA was intense, but I knew people like Barbara Jenkins wouldn't just roll over. The lawsuit, the countersuit, the terrible press, it had definitely shaken them. But they weren't admitting defeat. Not yet. If anything, they got sneakier. It started weirdly. Neighbors who used to give me the stink eye or ignore me completely suddenly started trying to chat. Not exactly friendly, but different. At first, I thought maybe the news stories had changed their minds. Then I noticed they were all asking the same kind of questions. How strong was my case? Was I thinking about settling? Had I considered selling just to end the stress? It clicked pretty quick. These weren't concerned neighbors. They were spies. The HOA was using them to gauge my resolve, see if I was cracking. I played dumb, gave them nothing. If anything, it just made me more determined. Then came the mysterious offer. A handwritten note in my mailbox one morning. No name, no official letterhead. Just, "Mr. Reynolds, there is an opportunity to resolve this issue quietly. A generous offer could be made if you are willing to sell." I read it twice, my grip tightening. So that was their next play. Harassment, legal threats, fraud. None of it worked. Now they were trying to buy me out, make the problem go away before things got even worse for them. I bet the offer would have been ridiculously high, way over market value. But no amount of money would make me back down. This was about principle. The HOA had bullied people for years, gotten away with it because nobody fought back effectively. If I took the money and ran, they'd win. They'd know their tactics worked. No way. I scanned the note for my records, then tossed it in my backyard fire pit and watched it burn. That must have been when they realized buying me out wasn't an option, because the intimidation started almost immediately. A few days later, an email from an unknown address. Subject: think carefully about your next move. Attached: a grainy photo of my house, taken from inside a car parked down the street. Someone had been watching me. I forwarded it straight to Daniel. "Textbook intimidation," he said when he called. "Trying to scare you into dropping the case." I felt a chill, but mostly anger. Bogus fines, illegal shutoffs, trespassing, that was one thing. This felt different, more direct. "We're watching you. This isn't just civil anymore," Daniel said grimly. "We file a police report. Harassment, stalking." I went down to the station that afternoon, submitted the email and all the other security footage. The officer this time seemed to take it more seriously. "This crosses a line," he said. "We'll open an investigation." That night, I installed even more cameras. Every angle covered. I wasn't going to be caught off guard. The next escalation came from the city again. Another bright orange notice on my door. Order for immediate inspection. Another anonymous complaint alleging multiple safety and zoning violations. They even threw in a line about public trespassers and an armed group potentially planning an attack originating from my property. It was so over the top, I almost laughed. Trying the same failed zoning stunt again? but adding a layer of fear-mongering? Pathetic. I called Daniel. They must have someone inside zoning enforcement, he sighed. Pulling strings. I called the zoning office myself, scheduled the inspection for that same day. The inspector showed up looking annoyed, like he knew it was bogus. He walked the property, checked a few things, shook his head. Nothing wrong here, he muttered. No violations, no safety issues, nothing. Another dead end for the HOA. But I wasn't just defending anymore. Daniel had been busy gathering testimony from other victims, people bullied into selling, hit with illegal fines, too scared to fight back until now. With the trespassing footage, the harassment emails, the fraud evidence, and now these testimonies, we had an arsenal. The first real breakthrough. Daniel filed formal criminal complaints against specific board members, including Barbara Jenkins. This wasn't just a lawsuit now, it was a criminal investigation. Suddenly, the untouchable board members were panicking. The harassment stopped overnight. No more letters, no fake fines, no lurking cars. The neighbors who'd been spying for the HOA suddenly couldn't make eye contact. Then, the biggest sign, an emergency HOA meeting was called. I didn't go, but I didn't need to. The next morning, a text from one of my secret supporters inside. Barbara resigned last night. Board is in chaos. Talking about settling the lawsuit. I let out a slow breath, a real smile spreading across my face. They'd lost control, and I wasn't stopping until every single one of them faced the consequences. I knew the HOA was reeling, but I also knew people like Barbara Jenkins and her cronies wouldn't just disappear quietly. The lawsuit, the criminal investigation, the terrible press, it had broken their power, but they weren't admitting defeat. If anything, they were probably scrambling to cover their tracks. Donna's resignation threw the whole HOA into chaos. Without her iron grip, the remaining board members apparently turned on each other, blaming everyone else for the mess. Homeowners who had been scared silent were now demanding answers, sharing horror stories of unfair fines, intimidation, and outright fraud. It turned out my case was just the tip of the iceberg. It wasn't long before Daniel got the email. The HOA wanted to settle. They were ready to negotiate. I read the email, feeling a weird mix of satisfaction and cold anger. After everything they put me through, the stress, the invasion of privacy, the threats, they thought they could just write a check and make it all go away? Daniel smirked when I showed him. They're terrified, he said. They know if this goes to trial, everything comes out. The fraud, the harassment, the emails proving they targeted you. This lawsuit won't just cost them money, it could land some of them in jail. I thought about it. Settling meant guaranteed money, and into the legal battle. But it also felt like letting them off easy. I didn't just want compensation, I wanted accountability. I wanted to make sure they could never do this to anyone else. What if I don't settle? I asked Daniel. He shrugged. Then we go to trial, and we annihilate them. Going to court was tempting, watching them squirm on the stand. But I realized some victories are bigger than just winning in court. I wanted systemic change. I wanted to dismantle the corrupt machine they had built. So, I sent back my terms. Non-negotiable. First, the HOA had to drop their ridiculous lawsuit against me immediately. And they had to issue a public statement admitting they had absolutely no legal authority over my property. Never did. Second, refunds. Every single homeowner they had unlawfully fined over the past 10 years, they had to pay them back, with interest, and issue a public apology for their predatory practices. Third, mandatory oversight. An independent audit of the HOA's finances and legal dealings going back years. Strict new rules to prevent corruption and abuse of power. Fourth, the entire board had to resign. Every last one of them. No exceptions. Daniel read my list, his eyebrows practically hitting his hairline. You realize they're going to lose their minds over this, right? Let them, I said. I've got nothing left to lose. For days, their lawyers tried to haggle, offered more money, tried to water down the terms, pleaded for leniency for certain board members. I refused to budge. I had them cornered, and I wasn't letting them escape. I ignored their counteroffers, their increasingly desperate emails. The longer they stalled, the worse it got for them. The media coverage didn't stop. More homeowners filed their own lawsuits. The criminal investigation into Barbara and the others expanded. Fraud charges were looking like a real possibility. The city even started reviewing the HOA's legal charter, threatening to revoke it entirely. The Coastal Ridge HOA had become a statewide embarrassment, a textbook example of HOA tyranny. Then, 3 weeks after I sent my final demands, Daniel got a short email from their lawyers. We agree to all terms. I read the email in stunned silence. I had won. Completely. It took another week to iron out the details, but the outcome was undeniable. The lawsuit against me vanished. The HOA published letters admitting my property was, and always had been, exempt. Refunds started going out to dozens of homeowners. The financial audit was scheduled. New term limits were put in place for board members. And, most satisfyingly, the entire board resigned. I didn't go to the final HOA meeting, but my neighbor texted me updates. Apparently, it was pure chaos. Angry homeowners shouting, board members blaming each other. Without Barbara in charge, they just imploded. The audit later exposed embezzlement. HOA funds used for fancy dinners, vacations, even a secret slush fund to fight homeowners like me. By the time it was all over, the Coastal Ridge HOA, as it had existed, was dead, collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. A new, homeowner-led committee was formed, focused on actual neighborhood issues, with no power to fine people or enforce arbitrary rules. The dictatorship was gone. That night, after the resignations were official, I sat on my porch, cracked open a cold beer, and watched the sunset over the ocean. The same view they claimed I was ruining. The same view they tried to steal. I thought about everything they'd thrown at me. The harassment, the threats, the fraud. They tried everything to break me. And I was still here. Not only had I won, but I'd fundamentally changed the neighborhood. No one would be bullied by that HOA again. The house was mine. The fight was over. And as I sat there, listening to the waves crash, I couldn't help but smile. In the end, I hadn't just beaten the HOA. I had destroyed them.